July 20, 1969. Lunar module of Apollo 11 mission lands on Moon. Astronaut Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin are sitting inside it. After successful landing, Neil Armstrong tries to open the door of the spacecraft called hatch, but it wasn't easy due to high pressure built inside the spacecraft as compared to the Moon's atmosphere, which is nearly vacuum. But releasing a series of latches and handles, he was successful in opening the hatch, and in his heavy spacesuit, he walked out and became the first person to walk on Moon. While doing this, a piece of lunar module broke, but due to vacuum, the astronauts did not hear any sounds. And that part was a ascent engine arming switch, which was significant to fly back to Earth. Without it, the lunar module could not take off. But did this happen in reality? Today, after more than 50 years, some people raise questions regarding this mission, completely denying it. They make theories that Apollo 11 was only a fake story by America, saying that this play was filmed on Earth and then showed to the world. How is this flag waving on Moon without air? What is the reality behind this? Let's try to understand.
Internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. We have a liftoff. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
Shadow. 4 forward, drift into the right a little. 30 seconds. Forward, drift. Contact light. Okay, engine stop. Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. Roger, Tranquility.
You'll be shocked to listen that the reason behind planning this Apollo 11 mission was a war. Cold War, which was between America and Soviet Union. In 1957, Soviet becomes first country to launch artificial satellite named Sputnik. In 1958, America also launches its satellite. But in 1961, Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin becomes the first person to go in space. After only a week of this, American President John F. Kennedy wrote a letter to his Vice President Lyndon Johnson on April 20, 1961. He asks him in this letter, how could they defeat the Soviets in space race by putting a laboratory in space? Or by a trip around the Moon? Are we working 24 hours a day on existing program? If not, why not? After a week of this, he gets his answer that the next big win will be sending man on Moon on May 25, 1960. One, he promises the world that before the end of this decade, he'll send men on Moon. It was an unbelievable announcement for people. For this, he gave $7 to $9 billion additional funding to space program. In just a few months, the testing had begun, and it went up to 1960, 7 being completely unmanned. In February 1967, they conducted a manned test, a test that will carry humans with it into space. This mission is named as Apollo 1, but one of their cabin catches fire, and the 3 astronauts who were preparing to go in outer space die in this tragic accident. After this painful accident, NASA does not stop. It continues making its way towards its destination. Apollo 4, Apollo 5, and Apollo 6 were all unmanned missions. In October 1968, Apollo 7 mission is launched with an attempt of sending humans into space, and this time they were successful. In December 1968, 3 astronauts are sent near the Moon. March 1969, Apollo 9 mission is launched, in which lunar module is tested, that part of the spacecraft which will land on Moon. May 1969, Apollo 10 mission. In this mission, all the practices were done by astronauts, which was to be done in Apollo 11 mission except landing on Moon. Finally, after all these testings, in July 1969, Apollo 11 mission is launched. 3 astronauts were a part of this mission. 38 years old, Commander Neil Armstrong, who was leading the mission. Module pilot Michael Collins and lunar module's pilot Edwin Buzz Aldrin. These three names are historic. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin are well known, but Michael Collins is not very famous, the reason we will discuss later in this video. Spacecraft of Apollo 11 mission had three main parts: Command Module, Service Module, and Lunar Module. First two parts are called CSMA, Command, and Service Module. The point here is only the Lunar Module will detach and land on Moon, for returning that part will again attach with CSM. To launch this mission, a Saturn V5 rocket was used. Before launch, this rocket was filled with 1 million gallons of kerosene, liquid hydrogen, and liquid oxygen, so the entire weight of this rocket was even more than 3 million kilograms. With this, rocket spacecraft reached the orbit of Earth within 10 minutes. And after 1.5 revolutions around Earth, astronauts were permitted by Mission Control to move towards Moon. Mission Control was present on Earth. They communicated and allowed translunar injection. Saturn V5 rocket was used at its third stage to get out of the Earth's orbit. This happened only within 5 hours of launch, but going from Earth to Moon took days. Astronauts lived inside, waiting for the biggest day of human history to come. On 19 July 1969, after traveling up to 4 lakhs kilometers, Apollo 11 spacecraft reaches the orbit of Moon. Now, it was to split into two parts. CSM separates from Lunar Module. CSM had Michael Collins inside it, and this part of spacecraft was called Columbia. On the other hand, Lunar Module was named Eagle with Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin inside. The CSM was to orbit the Moon, and only Lunar Module was to land on its surface. Only Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin will be given a chance to land on Moon, while Michael Collins will remain in orbit. Probably this is the reason why Michael Collins is not well known, because he did not land on Moon even going this much closer. But if we look into depth, the role of Michael Collins was most significant in taking the two astronauts back on Earth alive. At 8 p.m., the module began its movement towards landing. The landing was to be done by computer system, but at a height of 150 meters, Neil Armstrong takes control of landing himself. He noticed that the computer was landing spacecraft on a place where there were a lot of craters and stones. The landing place decided was 160 miles from the initial one. At 8:16 p.m., Buzz sees that only 5% of fuel is left. Considering this situation, Mission Control starts a countdown. This countdown will decide that should they land or abort the mission. When only 30 seconds were left on the countdown, Neil Armstrong sends a radio message on Earth.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. Roger, Tranquility. We copy on it.
Neil Armstrong then wears his spacesuit, opens the door, and becomes the first man to walk on Moon. This moment was live watched by 650 million people on television. His first words were heard by the people.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
After him, Buzz Aldrin also walks on Moon, and for about 2.5 hours they take samples of Moon's sand and stones, take pictures. There were also scientific objectives with them. For example, a television camera was set up on Moon that transmitted signals to Earth. They took a device with them to measure solar wind on Moon, a device to transmit laser beams on Earth to measure exact distance between Earth and Moon. In a total, they collected 23 kilograms of sand and stones sample, leaving behind an American flag and a plate with these lines. Here, men from the planet Earth first set foot upon the Moon. July 1969 AD, we came in peace for all mankind. Lunar Module was to remain on Moon for 21 hours and attach with the CSM, but the switch required to start that engine was broken. I have told this in the beginning. When they return to their module, they realize what has happened here and informs Mission Control about it. They try to find a solution. What is a switch? It completes the circuit. So Buzz Aldrin thought that if he finds something which can be used in place of that switch, the engine will start. He looks around and sees his ballpoint pen. He uses this ballpoint pen in place of that switch. Finally, Lunar module reattaches with CSM and starts its journey towards Earth. The plan was that when this spacecraft enters the Earth's atmosphere, service module will get separated from command module and will destroy in the atmosphere. But its debris might collide with command module and kill astronauts. So to avoid this, thrusts were made in service module so that will get destroyed going away from the spacecraft. But astronauts discovered that the thrusts were not working at the moment. They saw those debris destroying in front of them, and it was only a miracle that none of those debris collided with the spacecraft. The chances of astronauts dying in this mission were this high that America's President Richard Nixon had prepared an alternate speech in case these astronauts died. In that speech, it was written, "Fate has ordained that the men who went to the moon to explore in peace will stay on the moon to rest in peace. These brave men, Neil Armstrong and Aldrin, know that there is no hope for their recovery." But thankfully, this does not happen, and command module safely comes down from Earth's atmosphere, deploys parachute, and lands in the ocean. All 3 astronauts are alive and safe. These astronauts are rescued from the ocean. It was a huge miracle that they returned to Earth because everything in this mission did not go the way it was planned. Every step gave them a new challenge in this mission. An interesting thing is that they were kept in quarantine for 2 weeks to prevent any pathogens, viruses or bacteria from Moon. But again, they were safe. The promise American president made was fulfilled by NASA. America had finally won the space race. If you liked the video, don't forget to subscribe to help us make such content in future. Have a great day.
There was once a day that I would pray for